Rejected weak horse bought by a girl becomes a champion. And then something unbelievable happened. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a warm, golden light across the sprawling fields of the ranch. The air was thick with the earthy scent of hay and horses, a familiar aroma that comforted Eva as she stood by the paddock, her hand resting gently on the fence. She had always felt an unexplainable connection to horses, ever since she was a little girl. But the bond she shared with Midnight, a colt she had rescued from an uncertain fate, was something beyond anything she had ever known. As she watched Midnight graze peacefully, Eva's mind wandered back to the day she had found him. It was the kind of day that felt like it could change everything. The kind of day when life presents you with an opportunity to make a difference. But back then, it hadn't felt like an opportunity at all, more like a challenge. A challenge to prove that Midnight was worth something, that he had potential, despite his weak frame and unremarkable pedigree. No one else saw it. Not the people at the auction. Not the millionaire who had come with the intention of buying the best and brightest horses. They all looked at Midnight and saw nothing but an unworthy colt, someone too weak to ever amount to anything. But Eva saw something different. She could still hear the murmurs in the crowd when she raised her hand, bidding on him when others hesitated. "He's too frail," they whispered. "He'll never compete. No one would ever want him." But Eva wasn't like the others. She didn't care about pedigree or the opinions of people who couldn't see beyond appearances. All she saw was a horse with the heart of a champion, a heart that needed someone to believe in it. When she brought Midnight back to the ranch, the old barn creaked with the weight of the unspoken challenge ahead. Eva knew that the road would be tough, that people would doubt her, and that many would question whether this colt, this rejected animal, could ever be more than a burden. She remembered the look on her grandfather Charlie's face as he helped her settle the young horse into the stable. He had seen her determination before, but even he couldn't deny the enormity of the task. "You've got your work cut out for you, Eva," he'd said, his voice a mix of concern and quiet pride. But Eva didn't care about the doubts. Every morning, she would rise before the sun, already on her feet and ready to begin training. She wasn't just training Midnight. She was training herself to believe, to push past every obstacle, every setback. She worked him tirelessly, teaching him the fundamentals, strengthening his muscles, and building his confidence. She had an unshakable belief that if she could give him the right care, the right guidance, he would become the horse she always knew he could be. And day by day, Midnight proved her right. Slowly but surely, his frail form transformed. His confidence grew, his muscles hardened, and soon enough, his potential became undeniable. But the real challenge was still to come. One fateful afternoon, Eva received a call from Liam, a wealthy businessman who had heard about Midnight's recent success in local competitions. He wasn't interested in the colt's humble beginnings or the incredible bond Eva had built with him. He didn't care that Midnight had once been cast aside by everyone else. No, Liam wanted Midnight for his own personal stable, to add him to his collection of elite horses. He offered Eva a price she couldn't even fathom, enough money to change her life forever. It was tempting, the kind of offer that makes you question everything. $5 million, Liam said over the phone, his voice slick with confidence. "I'll take Midnight off your hands, and you'll never have to worry about money again. Think of all the things you could do. Think of the horses you could train, the competitions you could enter. Think of what your life could be like if you let go of the past and embraced a future of success." Eva stood still, the phone pressed to her ear, her heart racing. The temptation was powerful, but as she glanced over at Midnight, now a strong and proud horse, Eva knew that she couldn't sell him, not for any amount of money. He was more than just a horse to her. He was her partner, her friend. He had been with her through the struggles, the doubts, the long nights of training. Midnight had become a symbol of everything she believed in: resilience, heart, and the power of believing in something that others couldn't see. She could feel the weight of the decision hanging in the air, but she knew her answer. "No," she replied firmly, her voice unwavering. "You can't buy him. He's not for sale." In that moment, Midnight looked up from his grazing, his dark eyes meeting hers. It was as if he knew. It was as if he knew that he wasn't just her horse. He was the embodiment of everything she stood for. Midnight had proven to the world that even the most overlooked and underestimated beings could rise above their circumstances. And now, Eva was about to prove it too. The moment she turned down Liam's offer was the moment she realized that the real worth of Midnight wasn't in how much he could fetch at an auction, but in what he represented. He was the champion no one expected, and together, they were ready to show the world just how far they could go. As the months passed, the bond between Eva and Midnight grew stronger. They became inseparable, partners in a journey that neither had imagined when they first met. But despite the progress they made, the struggles were far from over. In fact, they were just beginning. Every day, Eva pushed Midnight to become better, to rise above the doubts that still lingered in the minds of others. But no matter how hard they worked, it often felt like the world was constantly testing them. Midnight was still a colt with a long way to go, and there were days when his body simply couldn't keep up with his spirit. His muscles were still weak, his stamina not what it needed to be. Eva would watch him falter, pushing through grueling training sessions only to see his energy drain faster than he could recover. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, and she could feel it, too. Her grandfather, Charlie, would often come by the barn to offer his support, but even he was beginning to show signs of doubt. "Eva, maybe you're pushing him too hard," he'd say, his voice gentle but filled with concern. "You've got to be patient. He's still young. He's got potential, but you can't rush greatness." But Eva wouldn't listen. She couldn't afford to. The competitive world of horse racing was harsh, unforgiving. If Midnight didn't improve quickly, if he didn't start winning the local races, then their future together would be in jeopardy. The small town where they lived didn't offer many opportunities, and every victory was another step toward proving to the world that she had made the right decision. She couldn't fail him. Every morning, she woke up before the sun, determined to get Midnight the training he needed. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion that drained her, but the mental toll that came with it. Every time they were passed by faster, more powerful horses during practice, her heart ached. She could see the doubt in the eyes of those watching. Her competitors, the spectators at the local events. They whispered behind her back, ridiculing her for choosing such an inferior colt to invest her time in. The whispers were relentless. "She's wasting her time with him. That horse will never be more than a farm pony. She's chasing a dream that isn't meant to be." It felt like a weight on her chest every time someone doubted Midnight. Every time someone questioned her decision, she had to dig deeper, find more strength. And it wasn't just the outsiders she had to fight against. It was the relentless pressure she put on herself. She couldn't back down. Not now. Not when they had come so far. There were nights when Eva would sit in the barn after the day's training was over, watching Midnight rest in his stall, his breathing heavy from the exertion. Charlie would sit beside her, his presence comforting, but even he could no longer deny the signs of wear and tear. "Eva, you've done a lot. But don't forget to take care of yourself, too. Midnight needs you strong, not just physically, but mentally." Eva didn't know how much more of the struggle she could endure. There were days when she wanted to quit, when the weight of the world pressed too heavily on her shoulders. She questioned herself constantly. Was she being selfish? Was she pushing Midnight too hard? Would he ever be the horse she had believed him to be? Or was she just fooling herself, clinging to a dream that wasn't meant to come true? And then there were the injuries. It started with a slight limp, barely noticeable at first, but it grew worse with each passing day. Midnight had pushed too hard, and his body was beginning to break down under the pressure. Eva watched helplessly as Midnight struggled to walk, his leg injured from the intensity of their training sessions. It felt like the universe had conspired to bring her to her breaking point. She spent sleepless nights at the barn, nursing his wounds, applying ointments, doing everything she could to ease his pain. She whispered to him, telling him to hold on. "We're not done yet, Midnight. We're not giving up." Her heart shattered as she realized that maybe it wasn't just Midnight who needed to heal. It was her, too. She had invested everything into this dream, everything into him, and now she was losing him. The dream she had held so tightly was slipping away like sand through her fingers. The weight of the struggle was consuming. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. But through it all, one thing kept her going. The thought of how far they had come, how much they had already overcome together. And so, despite the doubts, despite the injuries, Eva refused to quit. She refused to let the world dictate what Midnight could become. They had already defied the odds once. She had to believe they could do it again. And just when she thought she couldn't go on any longer, she saw something in Midnight that gave her hope. He was standing in the barn, resting his head against the stall door, his eyes soft and trusting. It was as if he knew how far they had come, how much they had both sacrificed. It was then that Eva realized that maybe it wasn't about winning the competitions or proving the world wrong. Maybe it was about the journey, about the bond they had formed along the way. And no matter how hard it got, she knew that they couldn't stop now. They had already started this journey together, and no matter how much they struggled, they would finish it together. The struggle, while grueling, had a purpose. Every painful moment, every challenge, was shaping Midnight and Eva into something greater than they had ever imagined. Slowly but surely, the colt who had been overlooked, doubted, and underestimated began to change. And with that change came the transformation of Eva, too. It wasn't just about physical strength. Midnight's transformation wasn't just a result of his muscles growing stronger or his stamina improving. It was a shift in his heart, his spirit, and the way he saw himself, and the way Eva saw him. Where others had seen weakness, she now saw the determination that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface. His eyes, once dull with doubt, now shone with a fire that matched her own. Eva had been right to believe in him. Midnight had always had the heart of a champion. He just needed someone who could see that, someone who would never give up on him. That someone was Eva. As the weeks turned into months, the work began to pay off. Midnight's limp faded. His muscles grew lean and powerful, and his movements became more fluid, more controlled. Where once he had stumbled, now he moved with purpose, and where he had struggled to keep up in the races, he now began to thrive. It wasn't overnight, and it wasn't easy, but it was happening. The change in Midnight wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. He began to trust Eva in a way that went beyond their training sessions. She wasn't just his rider. She was his partner, his confidant. Every time Eva mounted him, there was an unspoken understanding between them. She could feel his confidence growing, and he could feel the weight of her belief in him. It was as if they were no longer two separate beings, but a single force working together toward one goal. It was during one particularly grueling training session that Eva realized just how much Midnight had changed. They were on the track, pushing through yet another set of laps. Her breath came in heavy bursts, her legs sore from the exertion, but she could feel Midnight pushing forward with every stride, not out of fear, but out of sheer determination. His muscles, once weak, now moved with power, and his spirit was as strong as hers. In that moment, it was clear. Midnight had transformed into a true contender. He had gone from the weak, rejected colt to a force to be reckoned with. But Eva wasn't blind to the fact that this transformation had come at a cost. They had both sacrificed so much along the way. The nights spent in the barn, tending to his injuries. The hours of training that left both of them exhausted. The constant doubt that had gnawed at her, making her question whether it was all worth it. The toll had been great, but the rewards were even greater. Soon, they were ready for their first major race together. The pressure was immense. Every eye in the crowd was on them, waiting to see if the once overlooked colt had truly transformed into the champion Eva believed him to be. Eva felt the weight of every expectation on her shoulders. She had gotten this far, but this race would determine whether all their hard work had been worth it. As they stood at the starting line, Eva could feel Midnight's energy, his focus. This was the moment they had been working toward. The crowd was silent, the air thick with anticipation. And then, the race began. From the first stride, Midnight was a different horse. He wasn't the timid colt who had once struggled to keep up. He wasn't the weak animal that had almost been forgotten. He was a powerhouse, galloping with the grace and strength of a true champion. And Eva was right there with him, guiding him through every turn, pushing him when he needed it and holding back when he needed to conserve energy. The race was close. Midnight had to fight for every inch, but in the final stretch, it was clear. He surged ahead, crossing the finish line in first place, leaving the competition behind in his dust. The crowd erupted into cheers, but for Eva and Midnight, the victory wasn't about the applause. It wasn't about the title or the trophy. It was about the journey they had taken together, the transformation they had undergone as a team. Eva leaned forward, her heart racing as Midnight slowed to a trot. She whispered to him, her voice thick with emotion, "We did it, partner. We did it." In that moment, Eva understood something she hadn't fully grasped before. Midnight's transformation wasn't just about him becoming a champion in the traditional sense. It was about the bond they had forged through struggle and perseverance, about the trust they had built through each challenge. It was about the belief they had in one another when the world had doubted them. And Midnight wasn't just a champion on the track. He had become a symbol of resilience, of hope, and of the power of belief. Eva had always believed in him, even when no one else did, and that belief had turned him into something extraordinary. The transformation wasn't just his. It was theirs. And as they walked off the track together, the weight of their victory sinking in, Eva knew that this was just the beginning. Midnight had proven that anything was possible when you had the courage to push through, when you had the strength to believe in yourself, even when the world told you it wasn't enough. The transformation of Eva and Midnight was complete, and together, they were ready for whatever came next. The real test was never about winning races or claiming titles. It was about the journey. And though Eva and Midnight had already proven so much, the ultimate test was still ahead of them. The whispers of doubt that had once followed Midnight seemed to have faded, but now they were faced with a new challenge. Midnight's place among the best of the best, in a race that would be his toughest yet. The race was called the Grand Prix of Champions, an event where only the finest horses from around the world competed. Horses with bloodlines as rich as Midnight's weaknesses were scrutinized, with every competitor expected to have an impeccable record. For Eva and Midnight, this was the moment that would define not just their careers, but their legacy. The pressure weighed heavily on both of them. Eva could feel the eyes of the racing world upon her. For months, she had trained with Midnight, perfecting their routine, strengthening his body, honing his mind. But she also knew that in this race, anything could happen. Midnight wasn't just racing for himself anymore. He was racing for every horse who had ever been doubted, for every underdog who had been passed over, and for Eva herself, who had never stopped believing in him, even when the world had. The morning of the race, the air was thick with anticipation. The horses were lined up, each one more impressive than the last. But as Eva walked up to Midnight, she saw something different in his eyes. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't afraid. He was calm, focused, and he knew this was their moment. The crowd fell silent as the announcer's voice echoed through the stadium, calling each horse to the starting line. Midnight stood tall, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths, his coat gleaming under the bright lights. Eva mounted him, feeling the familiar warmth of his body beneath her. She could hear the soft clatter of the other horses, their hooves pounding the ground, but all she could focus on was Midnight. As the gates opened and the race began, Eva knew this wasn't going to be like any other. The pace was faster, the competition fiercer, and every stride felt like it could be the one that would determine their future. The track was treacherous, filled with sharp corners and narrow stretches that tested even the most seasoned competitors. Midnight's heart pounded as he pushed himself harder than ever before, his hooves cutting through the dirt with precision. For the first few laps, it was clear that the other horses had more experience. They moved with the elegance of horses who had been bred for speed, their lines sharp and effortless. Midnight struggled to keep up, and Eva could feel the pressure building, the weight of every expectation on their shoulders. But there was no quitting now. They had come too far to give up. It was on the third lap when Eva felt it, the shift. Midnight was no longer simply trying to catch up. He was in his element. His rhythm was perfect, his focus unshakable. And as they rounded a sharp corner, Eva realized that Midnight wasn't just racing for a victory anymore. He was racing for something deeper. He was racing to prove to the world that greatness wasn't about pedigree or past achievements. It was about heart. The final stretch was grueling. Midnight's legs were tired, his muscles aching from the relentless pace, but his spirit never wavered. The other horses were just ahead, But Eva knew this was where they had to make their move. With a silent command, she urged Midnight forward, and like the champion he had become, Midnight surged ahead, his powerful legs carrying them forward with breathtaking speed. It was neck and neck. The other horses pushed themselves harder, but Midnight responded with equal force, his body moving as though it had been built for this moment. As they crossed the final line, Eva felt the world stop for just a heartbeat. She didn't know if they had won. She didn't know if they had lost. But in that moment, it didn't matter. The race had been their ultimate test, and they had passed it, together. The stadium erupted into cheers as the announcer's voice echoed over the loudspeakers, declaring the winners. And though Midnight crossed the finish line in second place, for Eva, there was no doubt who the true victor was. They had proven something far more important than a trophy. They had proven that heart and belief could carry them further than anyone had ever imagined. As Eva and Midnight slowed, she felt the weight of the moment wash over her. This wasn't just a victory. It was the culmination of everything they had worked for. The years of training, the sacrifices, the challenges they had faced. And through it all, they had never given up on each other. The reporters rushed over, cameras flashing, but Eva didn't hear their questions. She only heard Midnight's steady breathing, the soft clink of his hooves as he stood tall beside her. And as she looked into his eyes, she knew that the ultimate test hadn't been about winning. It had been about never quitting, no matter how hard the road became. They had come from nothing, but together, they had proven that greatness could be found where no one had looked. And as Eva leaned down to kiss Midnight's forehead, she whispered softly, "We did it, my champion." And in that moment, they both knew that this was only the beginning. When the dust settled after the Grand Prix of Champions, Eva and Midnight stood as winners in a way that no one had ever expected. The world had watched as they crossed the finish line in second place, but for those who truly understood the significance of the race, there was no question of who the real champion was. The media buzzed with excitement, focusing on the newcomer who had defied expectations and nearly claimed the top spot. But the story wasn't just about the race. It was about the journey, the bond between Eva and Midnight, and the belief that had carried them to this moment. Reporters flocked to Eva, microphones thrust in her face, eager to know how she had managed to take an underdog with no pedigree to the cusp of victory. With a soft smile, Eva spoke to the gathered crowd, but her eyes never left Midnight. "This horse," she said, her voice steady with emotion, "is more than just a competitor. He's family. He's my partner, and we've built something together that no trophy could ever define." She paused, her gaze softening as she looked at Midnight, who stood quietly beside her, his eyes full of quiet pride. "This victory," Eva continued, "isn't just mine or his. It belongs to everyone who ever believed in the underdog, everyone who had to fight for what they wanted, and everyone who thought they weren't enough. This is for all of you." In that moment, something shifted. The world didn't just see Midnight as a racehorse. They saw him as a symbol of resilience, of overcoming the impossible. The once doubted horse, rejected by so many, had shown the world that greatness wasn't defined by pedigree, but by the heart, spirit, and determination to push forward, no matter the odds. As Eva stood on the podium beside Midnight, the crowd roared with applause. But it wasn't just the finish line they were celebrating. It was the story behind it. The story of a girl who had refused to let anyone define her or her horse, who had believed in Midnight when no one else would. And the story of a horse who had never given up, even when the world told him he wasn't good enough. Together, they had become a legacy in their own right. The race had catapulted them into the spotlight, but it was what happened afterward that cemented their place in history. Eva and Midnight didn't just continue racing. They became ambassadors for a movement, one that championed the underdogs, the misunderstood, and the overlooked. They went on to inspire countless others in the racing world and beyond, showing people that talent wasn't always what the world saw at first glance. With each race, they not only competed, they became symbols of hope, of unwavering belief in something greater than just winning. Years later, the story of Eva and Midnight would be told and retold, in classrooms, books, and documentaries. Their names became synonymous with persistence and overcoming adversity. And though Midnight no longer raced, his legacy continued to grow. The ranch where Eva had raised him became a place of learning for aspiring young riders and trainers. It was here that Eva shared the lessons she had learned from Midnight, the most important being that success wasn't just about speed or records, but about the relationship between the rider and their horse, built on trust, care, and mutual respect. The story of Midnight became the foundation of everything that the ranch represented: heart over pedigree, belief over doubt, and family over competition. Eva herself became a mentor, someone who not only taught the next generation of trainers and riders, but also gave motivational talks about the power of perseverance. She often spoke about the importance of believing in the potential of every horse, even the ones no one else saw as worthy of attention. She urged people to remember that a champion wasn't defined by where they started or how they were perceived, but by what they did with the opportunities they were given, and the will to never stop fighting. One of her proudest moments came years after the Grand Prix of Champions, when she received a letter from a young girl who had read Eva's book about Midnight. The letter, written in delicate handwriting, simply read, "I'm not good at anything, but when I read about you and Midnight, I realized that if you can do it, so can I. I'm going to keep trying, no matter what anyone says." Eva folded the letter and smiled, knowing that the real victory had never been the accolades or the medals. It had always been the impact they had made on others. The girl's words were the ultimate testament to what Eva and Midnight had achieved. They had done more than inspire others to race. They had inspired them to believe in themselves, to never give up, and to understand that sometimes the most unlikely stories were the ones that changed the world. As Eva stood on the porch of the ranch one evening, watching the sun dip behind the hills, she felt at peace. Midnight was no longer the young colt who had been overlooked at that auction. He was a legend, a living testament to what could be achieved with the right support and the unwavering belief that every soul has its own potential to shine. And in that quiet moment, Eva knew that the victory they had shared was the beginning of a legacy far greater than any race could ever define. As the years passed, Eva and Midnight's story continued to ripple through the racing world and beyond. It was no longer just about the races they ran or the victories they claimed. It was about the deeper, unspoken lessons that their journey imparted. The world had seen what Eva had known all along: that greatness wasn't always born from wealth, pedigree, or status. Sometimes it was forged in the quiet moments of perseverance when no one else was watching, and it was driven by a heart that refused to give up. Their legacy wasn't just written in trophies and headlines, but in the lives they touched: the young rider who found confidence in their story, the trainer who began to see potential in every horse, and the countless others who learned to trust their instincts and believe in the unseen. For every person who had ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or rejected, Eva and Midnight proved that there was always a chance for redemption, always an opportunity to rise above the odds. Eva often reflected on how far they had come, on how the simple act of seeing something different in Midnight, of believing in him when no one else would, had sparked a movement that transcended the sport of racing. It wasn't just about the horse, it was about what Midnight represented: the power of resilience, the magic of unwavering belief, and the truth that sometimes the things that seem impossible are the very things that shape our future. On the ranch, Midnight enjoyed his well-earned retirement, playing in the fields and resting under the shade of the trees, no longer racing but still a champion in every sense. Eva continued to share their story in books, speeches, and moments of quiet reflection, knowing that each time she spoke about their journey, it inspired someone, somewhere, to believe in themselves. And so, the tale of Eva and Midnight endured, long after the racecourses were empty and the crowds had gone. Their victory wasn't just in the races they won or the records they set. It was in the hearts they touched and the lives they changed. They had proven that the greatest victories in life are not measured by fame or fortune, but by the impact we leave on the world, the belief we inspire in others, and the legacy we create by showing that no dream is too big, no hurdle too high, and no heart too small to achieve greatness. In the end, the story of Eva and Midnight reminds us all of a simple, powerful truth. The greatest champions are the ones who never stop believing, not just in their potential, but in the potential of others. And as long as people continue to dream, to strive, and to believe in the impossible, Eva and Midnight's legacy will live on, reminding us that sometimes the greatest victories come from the most unexpected places. What did Eva and Midnight's incredible journey teach you? Are you ready to believe in the impossible and chase your own dreams, no matter the odds? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Whether it's about overcoming challenges, the bond between humans and animals, or how you found your own moment of transformation. If Eva and Midnight's story inspired you, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more heartwarming, motivational tales. Your support means the world and helps keep stories like these alive, inspiring others to believe in their own potential. Remember, the greatest victories often come from the most unexpected places. Keep pushing forward. You never know where your next breakthrough might be. Let's keep believing in the impossible together.